Gentleman from Maryland is recognized.
Actually, I think the gentlelady from Pennsylvania.
Gentleman from Pennsylvania is recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Ms. Bondi, I'm here. On September 25th, President Trump signed a memorandum known as NSPM 7, purporting to address domestic terrorism. But Americans across the political spectrum were immediately alarmed by the memo's blurring of the line between unlawful conduct and constitutionally protected speech and activity, as well as its call to investigate, prosecute, and dismantle groups that the president and Stephen Miller described without evidence as, quote, an organized campaign of radical left terrorism. Now, counterterrorism experts were further alarmed by the administration's singular focus on left-wing extremism, combined with the sudden deletion from the DOJ website of decades of research and law enforcement analysis, which had concluded that right-wing extremism poses the greatest terrorism threat to Americans. The president's memo broadly and vaguely links violent conduct to ideologies, and it targeted specifically anti-American, anti-Christian, and anti-capitalist beliefs, as well as, quote, hostility to so-called traditional American views on family, religion, and morality, end quote. President Trump has repeatedly and openly, however falsely, tried to brand his political opponents with these sentiments listed in his memo. But as you know, as a lawyer, holding beliefs that the White House disagrees with is not a crime. And the statute defining domestic terrorism requires criminal acts, not just thoughts and ideas. That's why legal experts, nonprofit leaders, religious freedom, and civil rights advocates immediately raised the alarm that the new presidential directive was a politically motivated attack on civil society designed to silence those who disagree with the administration. So, Ms. Bondi, Section 3 of that memo directed you, as Attorney General, to submit to the President and Stephen Miller a list of groups or entities whose members are engaged in acts that meet the definition of domestic terrorism. And then on December 4th, you directed the FBI to work with a variety of law enforcement entities to compile a list of groups and entities engaged in such acts by January 3rd, 2026, and to update that report every 30 days thereafter. So can we assume that you or persons under your direction at the Department of Justice have prepared that list of groups or entities who are designated as domestic terrorist organizations? And I just remind you that's a yes or no question. Did you prepare the list?
I'm not going to answer it yes or no, but what I will say is I know Antifa is part of that. I will talk to you about that.
I'm reclaiming my time. I asked you whether you
an
prepared
Antifa member
a
was
list.
arrested in Minneapolis federal court for
my
cyber
time.
stalking.
Did you
they
have
ask a question
list?
and don't want an answer.
The answer is yes or no.
Time belongs to the gentlelady from Pennsylvania. Gentlelady can proceed.
Okay. So will you commit to providing this committee with any list of organizations that you have recommended be designated as domestic terrorist organizations?
We will comply with the law in all matters.
Will you commit to provide this committee with your list of entities that you recommend be designated as domestic terrorist organizations?
I'm not going to commit to anything to you because you won't let me answer questions.
Okay, well then we do understand that your current position is that you have a secret list of people or groups that you are accusing of domestic terrorism, but you won't share it with Congress. And I'd remind you that when the US government designates an entity as a foreign terrorist organization, it must report that to Congress and to the entity, because the government can make a mistake and the entity has the opportunity to contest it. So your position seems to be that if you falsely designate an American or an American organization as a terrorist group, there's nothing they can do about it. I think we get it. You don't want to answer the question.
No, you don't get anything regarding public safety.
Thank you.
Nothing.
Thank you for the insult. It's clear you didn't come to Congress prepared to answer questions that the American people have every right to have answered. But if you were prepared to answer truthfully, here's what we expect the facts to show. The administration is keeping lists of Americans who the White House says are engaged in domestic terrorism. Those lists could include Americans who have not committed any acts of terrorism, but simply disagree with this administration, people like Renee Good and Alex Preddy. And your list may include clergy, elected officials, and members of indivisible groups across the country. And those lists likely don't include Proud Boys or Oath Keepers who were actually convicted. Americans have never tolerated political demagogues who use the government to punish people on an enemies list. It brought down McCarthy.
Time of the gentlelady's
It brought down
expired.
Nixon,
Time of
and
the
it will
gentlelady's
bring down
expired.
this administration as well.
And you're right.
I yield back.
That's why we're so glad they rescinded the
That's right.
memorandum targeting parents. For goodness sake, as the gentleman from California just pointed out in his 5 minutes.